Snow over black iron. A candle in a western window. Some rooms remember. Stone keeps what blood spills into it, and old magic keeps what silence refuses to speak. Tonight, a door will seal behind two people who swore they'd never meet again, and our story begins. The snow came down in slow, deliberate drifts over the western grounds of Malfoy Manor, each flake settling onto the black iron of the gate with the patience of something that had all winter to wait. Hermione Granger stood with her gloved hand flat against the bars, the cold biting clean through wool into skin, and let herself breathe once. A long, measured draw of air that tasted of frost and wet stone, and something older beneath it, something that clung to the grounds the way smoke clung to burnt parchment long after the fire was out. She had sworn on the courthouse steps 19 months ago that she would never come back here. The ministry's requisition order crackled in her inner pocket as she moved. 3 signatures, 2 seals, 1 name at the bottom that made the whole thing impossible to refuse. She had requested reassignment twice. Both times the answer had come back on the same violet-edged parchment, the same maddening courtesy. Miss Granger's expertise in curse identification is uniquely suited to the inventory in question. The department regrets the inconvenience. The inconvenience. As though the inconvenience were a draft in a corridor and not the precise flagstones on which she had once bled. She pressed her wand to the lock. The gate shivered, recognized her signature, and drew itself open with the reluctant grace of a servant forced to admit an enemy. She walked through. The drive was long. She took it slowly, not because the snow demanded it, but because she refused to arrive out of breath. Every step was a small and private negotiation. You are 20 years old. You are a ministry officer. You have duelled and survived worse rooms than this one. The words formed and settled and held their shape until the manor itself rose out of the white. Grey stones softened by winter, yew hedges blackened at their edges, the tall windows of the western wing lit by a single candle on the second floor. He was watching. Of course he was watching. By the time she reached the entrance hall, he had descended to meet her, and the first unbearable part of the evening was already underway, the looking. He stood 3 paces from the bottom stair in a dark grey frock coat, his hair the pale non-colour of water in a silver bowl, his hands clasped behind his back in the way she had come to understand meant he did not trust what they would do if left unsupervised. His face showed her nothing. His face had not shown her anything since the trials. Miss Granger. His voice carried the small, exact courtesy of a man who had been raised to name his guests, even when he wished to drown them. The ministry informed me you would arrive at 6. It is 6. It is 6 and 4 minutes. A pause. A muscle in his jaw shifted once and was still. The cellars are this way, he said, and turned. She followed him through corridors she had last seen from a height of her own knees, dragged by the hair. She kept her eyes at the level of his shoulders and did not permit them to drift. The wallpaper was the same. The portraits were the same, though 3 of the larger ones had been turned to the wall under ministry order. The runner under her boots was the same dark, dust-eating red. She catalogued these facts as though they were items on a list, and by the time they reached the cellar stair, the list had become a small, dense weight in her chest that she could carry without dropping. At the top of the stair, he stopped. There is a lamp at the the bottom," he said, without turning. "The wards on the lower levels are sensitive. I would ask you not to cast anything brighter than a lumos until we have descended. I know how to enter a warded room, Malfoy. I am sure you do." The faintest pressure on the words, a thing not quite a reply. "I am telling you how to enter this one." He went first. She followed. The stair was stone, cold enough that the chill rose through her boots, and it turned twice before it opened into the long, low chamber she had been ordered to catalogue. A single oil lamp burned on a bracket above the door. Beyond it, the cellar stretched into shadow. A vaulted space, stone-flagged, hung on every wall with the pale closed faces of cabinets, chests, and glass-fronted presses whose contents were indistinct in the low light. The air was dry. It smelt of wax, of old iron, of the particular thin mineral bitterness that clung to objects that had been enchanted too many times by too many hands. And underneath it all, fainter, impossible, insisted upon by some part of her that could not be reasoned with, the smell of her own blood. She stopped on the threshold. "I know," he said quietly without looking at her. He had gone 4 paces into the room and stopped as well. If you require a moment, I can wait on the stair. I don't require anything from you." "No." The word came out level. "You never have." She stepped into the cellar. The flagstone was near the centre of the room. She did not look at it. She looked instead at the nearest cabinet, tall, silver-chased, its doors worked with a design of entwined serpents, and took her notebook out of her coat and uncapped her ink, and began, with a hand she refused to allow to shake, to write the date at the top of the page. "We will begin with the western wall," she said, "if you would be so good as to unlock the first cabinet." He moved past her. The hem of his coat passed within an inch of her sleeve, and neither of them acknowledged it. He set his palm against the silver-chased doors and spoke a word she did not catch, something low in the older Malfoy tongue. The syllables, carrying the clipped weight of a household charm, passed down through too many generations to be written anywhere she could read. The cabinet clicked. It did not open. It clicked again, a second time, and the sound was different. A small wrong note, as though the lock had turned against the grain of its own mechanism. A faint green light flared under his hand and died. He withdrew his palm at once, precise and unhurried, and she saw the tendons stand up along the back of his wrist. "Step back," he said. "What is it?" "Step back, Granger." She stepped back. The green light came again, brighter. It ran up the seam of the cabinet doors like water running the wrong way up a wall, and then it leapt, not at them, but outward, into the stones of the floor, and from the stones into the walls, and from the walls into the low vault of the ceiling, and for one suspended moment, the entire cellar was lit from within its own architecture in a pale, sick green that put every shadow into the wrong place. Then it was gone. The oil lamp above the door guttered once and steadied. She stood very still. He stood very still. The silence that followed had a texture to it, a faint ringing, almost a pressure against the ear, the sort of charged hush that follows a spell cast badly and left half-finished in the air. "What," she said carefully, "was that?" He did not answer at once. He was looking at the doorway at the top of the stair, and something in his posture had gone narrower, harder to read. "Malfoy. The wards," he said. "They reacted to—" He stopped. He corrected himself with visible effort. They reacted. I did not know they would. Reacted to what? He looked at her then. In the low light, his eyes were not grey, but the colour of a coin held too long in a closed hand. There was something in them she had not seen before. Not alarm exactly. A deeper thing, dressed carefully in composure. To you, he said. To you and to me. In the same room, below the main floor. That is absurd. I have been in this manor before. You have been in this room before, he said. And for the first time since she had arrived, he did not seem to know where to put his voice. Under duress. The wards were otherwise occupied then. Tonight they are not. She felt the cold of the flagstones climb her ankles. Malfoy, are you telling me? I am telling you. I do not know precisely what they have done. He moved at last towards the stair. But I intend to find out. Stay here. I am not staying anywhere. Stay here. He went up 3 steps, 4, and stopped. He raised his hand towards the door at the top, as though to set his palm against it. He did not quite touch it. He lowered his hand slowly and came back down the stair with the careful face of a man composing bad news on the way to its delivery. The door is sealed, he said. Then unseal it. I cannot. A short breath. Not from this side. Not tonight. Try the flue. There is no flue in the cellars. Then call your elf. I have been calling her since the light flared. His voice had not risen. If anything, it had gone quieter, and that was somehow worse. She does not answer. I do not believe she can hear me. Hermione looked at him. She looked at the door at the top of the stair. She looked at the flagstone near the centre of the room. She let herself look at it, finally, for 1 full second. And then she looked back at him. How long? She said. The wards will resettle. They always have. By morning, probably by morning. Possibly sooner. He paused. Possibly not. Possibly not. I will not lie to you, Granger. Not about this. A silence. Somewhere beyond the stone, muffled and indifferent, the snow went on falling over the grounds. She drew a slow breath through her nose. She capped her ink. She closed her notebook on her finger to mark the page, because if she did not do something with her hands, she was going to do something with them she would regret. She lifted her chin. Very well, she said. Then we will begin with the western wall. He stared at her for the space of a heartbeat. Something crossed his face. A brief, involuntary thing, gone before she could name it. And then he inclined his head, the smallest fraction, and walked towards the cabinet. The cellar breathed around them, stone cold and watchful, and the door at the top of the stair did not open. She did not begin with the western wall. She walked to it, yes. She set her notebook on the narrow shelf beneath the first cabinet, and laid her quill beside it, and uncapped her ink a second time, all the small, precise motions of a woman who intended to work. But her hand, when she reached for the quill, stopped an inch above it. Her fingers did not tremble. They simply would not close around the shaft of the pen, as though the muscles between her knuckles had forgotten the order of operations. She stood there for perhaps 4 seconds. Then she straightened her cuff, though it did not need straightening, and she straightened it again, and she said, without turning her head, I need a moment. Take it. His voice came from further away than she expected. She glanced over her shoulder and found that he had not followed her to the cabinet at all. He had placed himself near the foot of the stair, one hand resting on the stone newel, his face angled into the dimness in a way that kept her half out of his field of view. The courtesy of it caught her off guard. He was not watching her compose herself. He had chosen, deliberately, not to watch. She turned her back to him fully and let her eyes close. Not the floor. Do not look at the floor. Count the cabinets. There are 9 cabinets on the western wall and 4 presses on the eastern, and the long chest of drawers at the end is walnut with silver fittings, and the silver is tarnished at the 3rd drawer from the top. The inventory steadied her. She opened her eyes. She picked up the quill. Malfoy. Yes. The cabinet you attempted to open. What is inside it? A pause. I do not know with certainty. Give me the uncertain answer. A marriage casket, he said. My great-grandmother's. The charms on it were laid by her mother and layered by her, and when the household passed to my father, he added a 3rd binding. It has not been opened in my lifetime. And the reactive magic, the green light, old protective work, against... He stopped. She heard him choose a word. Against unwanted entry by blood not of the house. She set the quill down very carefully. Say what you mean. I am saying what I mean, Granger. You are saying it in the Malfoy dialect. Translate. A silence. Then quieter. The charm distinguishes between those of Malfoy blood and those who are not. It is not a charm I would have laid. It is not a charm I can unlay from inside this room. It woke when I touched the casket, and it... He exhaled. It found you. She did not turn around. She looked at the silver-chased doors in front of her, at the serpents worked into the metal, at her own dim reflection held in a fragment of polish between them, and she felt something go very quiet inside her chest. Not anger. Anger would have been easier. This was the older, colder thing that lived beneath anger, the part of her that had sat in a Wizengamot chamber for 11 days and listened to the word mudblood translated into legal Latin and back again. So, she said, your family's wards treat me as a trespasser, even when the ministry has sent me here with a writ. Yes. And you knew this was possible. I suspected, he said, that something might happen. I did not know it would be this. You did not warn me. No. Why? The word came out flatter than she had meant. She heard him shift his weight, a small sound against the stone. Because if I had warned you, he said, you would have insisted on entering anyway, and you would have done so with your back straight and your wand drawn, and you would have hated me for thinking you needed the warning. I decided, wrongly, that I would rather be the one to encounter the problem than the one to have predicted it. She turned around. He was still standing by the newel. His hand had come off the stone and was clasped at the small of his back with the other, the old posture, the drilled-in one. But his eyes met hers directly for the first time that evening, and what she saw in them was not defiance. It was the careful, exposed face of a man who had just told the truth and was waiting to be punished for it. That was not your decision to make, she said. I know. You do not get to decide on my behalf which of my reactions I am permitted to have. I know, Granger. Do not use my name like that. I have not used your name at all. You have used the shape of it. You have used it as though... She stopped herself. She pressed her lips together. She drew one breath in through her nose and let it out evenly through her mouth, and said with a calm she did not feel, We will work. We will catalogue what we can safely approach. We will not speak of anything else. Is that acceptable? Yes. Good. She turned back to the cabinet. She picked up the quill. She wrote in her steady round script, Western Wall, Object 1, silver chased press, serpent motif, late 18th century, subject to active blood ward, unstable. Do not attempt entry. She underlined do not attempt entry twice. Behind her, she heard him move. Not towards her, away. She heard the soft, displaced whisper of his coat as he crossed the cellar on the far side, and a small click as he opened the door of a smaller cupboard. And after that, the careful, dry rustle of a man going through papers, as though paper were the only thing in the world that would hold still for him. They worked. For perhaps half an hour, they worked in a silence that was not quite peace, but was at least a kind of truce. She moved along the western wall. He moved along the eastern. The distance between them was perhaps 20 feet of stone-flagged floor, and she did not cross it, and neither did he. Occasionally, one of them spoke, a query about a date, a request for the spelling of an old French surname on a label. And the other answered, and the silence closed over the words again and smoothed them away. She did not look at the floor. She catalogued the second cabinet and the third. She made a note against the fourth, which hummed very faintly under her palm when she brought her hand within 2 inches of its door. She wrote the note. She moved on. She reached the 5th cabinet and realized, only when she had stopped in front of it, that she had walked nearly to the center of the room. The flagstone was 3 paces to her left. She did not look down. She did not need to. She knew the exact stone, the one with the hair-fine crack running from its northwest corner to a point just short of its center, the one that was a quarter shade darker than its neighbors because something had soaked into it and had not, despite a 1.5 years of house elf labor, come entirely out. Her hand was on the cabinet door. It was not moving. Granger! His voice was quite close. She had not heard him cross the room. When she looked up, he was standing perhaps 5 feet away, on the far side of the very flagstone she was refusing to acknowledge, and he had stopped there as though the stone itself were a line he would not step over. I can take the center section, he said. You take the north end. I am perfectly capable. I know you are capable. His voice was low, flat, careful. I am not offering because I doubt you. I am offering because I would rather not watch you do it. She stared at him. For a moment, she thought she had misheard him. She replayed the sentence in her head. I would rather not watch you do it. And she understood, with a small dropping sensation at the base of her sternum, that he had not said, I would rather you did not have to. He had said, I would rather not watch. He had put himself, inadvertently or not, at the center of the sentence. He had confessed to a preference about his own experience, and in doing so, he had admitted that he had one. Something in her that had been held tight for 1.5 hours loosened a quarter turn. Malfoy. Take the north end, Granger. Look at me. He did. She was not sure afterwards what she had expected to find in his face. She had expected perhaps the cool blank, the trained one. She had expected perhaps defiance. What she found instead was a man who had not slept enough in some time, whose mouth was set against something, whose eyes, grey in better light, the colour now of pewter held against a candle, were not looking away from her, even though every line of his posture suggested that looking away was what they most wanted to do. "Why?" she said. "Why what? Why would you rather not watch?" He did not answer at once. He looked down, not at the floor, she noted, not at the stone between them, but at his own hand, which had come to rest against the edge of a chest beside him. His thumb pressed into a small nick in the wood. The pressure whitened the nail bed. "Because I did once," he said. The words dropped into the cellar the way a stone dropped into still water. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then Hermione took her hand off the cabinet door very slowly, as though any sudden motion would shake loose something that had only just precariously settled. "You did once." "Yes. Say what you mean, Malfoy. I think you know what I mean. I want to hear you say it." His jaw worked. She watched the small muscle there tighten and release and tighten again. His thumb pressed harder into the nick in the wood. He did not look up at her. "I stood in the doorway," he said, "and I watched. That is what I mean. I stood in the doorway of this room, and I watched, and I did not." He stopped. He drew a breath that sounded as though it caught somewhere beneath his collarbone. "I did not cross the threshold. I did not speak. I watched, and when it was over, I went upstairs, and I have not come down into this cellar since. Until tonight, I have not been able to." The silence after this was different from the silences before it. It had weight. It had temperature. It was the silence of a room in which something that had been sealed for a long time had just been opened. Not all the way, not even halfway, but enough that the air inside could no longer be mistaken for the air outside. Hermione discovered that her hand was shaking. She looked at it with a kind of detached surprise, and then she closed it, carefully, into a fist at her side. "I did not ask you to tell me that," she said. "I know." "I did not. I know, Granger. I am aware that you did not ask. I am telling you because you asked why I would rather not watch you cross the center of this room, and the only honest answer is the one I have just given you, and I—" He stopped again. When he spoke next, his voice had dropped to something quieter, something that did not carry well in stone. "I am tired of not giving you the honest answer." She did not know what to do with that. She stood on her side of the flagstone, and he stood on his. And between them, the dark quarter-shade of old blood in old stone did what it had always done, which was to exist, indifferent to whether either of them looked at it. The oil lamp at the top of the stair guttered in a draught that should not have reached it and steadied again. Somewhere above, very faint, the clock in the long gallery struck the half-hour, and the sound came down to them filtered and hollow, as though through water. "I am going to sit down," Hermione heard herself say. "For a moment. Only a moment. Yes. Not because. I did not think because." She went to the low bench against the western wall. She sat. She placed her hands flat on her knees, palms down, fingers spread, and she stared at the backs of her own hands as though she had never seen them before. And across the cellar, Draco Malfoy took his thumb out of the nick in the wood of the chest and did not move from where he stood. The cellar held them both. Somewhere under the stone, very faint, the wards breathed. The cold came in slowly, the way cold always came into old houses, not as a sudden drop, but as a quiet revision of the air, a small adjustment one noticed first in the fingers and then in the hollow above the collarbone, and only much later in the spine. Hermione noticed it in her fingers. She had been sitting on the bench for perhaps 10 minutes, hands flat on her knees, when she realized that the knuckle of her left thumb had gone numb where it rested against the wool of her skirt. She curled the hand, uncurled it, curled it again. The sensation returned reluctantly. Across the cellar, Draco had not moved from the chest. He was standing with his shoulders squared and his weight even on both feet and his hands clasped behind his back. And she had the distinct sense that he was doing this, not because he was comfortable, but because he had decided, some minutes ago, that he would not be the first to sit, and was now paying for that decision with every joint in his body. She flexed her fingers once more. Malfoy. Yes, the temperature. I have noticed. How cold does it get down here? A pause. He appeared to be giving the question the honest consideration it deserved, rather than the reassuring one. Colder than this, he said. How much colder? By the small hours, cold enough that the water in the pitcher freezes, if a pitcher is left. It is not an inhabited part of the house. No, she said. I had noticed. She had not meant it as a cut. It came out as one anyway. She saw the small tightening at the corner of his mouth. Not offence, something smaller, the flinch of a man who had already scored the same blow against himself several times and had not expected to hear it from her. Not now, not after what he had said across the flagstone. I did not mean, she began. You were not wrong. I was being unkind. You are permitted, Granger. Not for sport. He looked at her at that. A long, strange look. Something moved behind his eyes that she could not quite catch, and then he inclined his head in the smallest possible acknowledgement and looked away again towards the foot of the stair where nothing was happening, and nothing would happen until dawn, if dawn was the hour the wards chose to release them. She rubbed her hands together once and stopped, because the friction sounded too loud in the stone. We should move, she said. Staying still is worse. Yes. She stood. Her knees complained. She had not realized how long she had been sitting, nor how deeply the chill had got into her. Her coat was good. It was her ministry coat, the heavy charcoal wool she had bought with her first full month's salary. But it had been cut for the walk between her flat and the atrium, not for a stone cellar in the middle of a Wiltshire winter with the wards drinking warmth out of the air. She pulled it more tightly about her and fastened the second button, which she usually left open, and then the third. Draco was watching her do this. He stopped watching the moment she looked up, but she had caught the end of the look, and she had seen the quick, small calculation in it. He was taking an inventory of his own. "Turn out your pockets," she said. "I beg your pardon." "Your pockets. What do you have on you?" A beat. Then, with the faint, dry amusement of a man given an unexpectedly practical instruction in an unpractical moment. "My wand, which is useless against the door. A handkerchief, clean. A pocket watch, which is running 3 minutes fast. A silver coin I have carried since I was 13, and for which I can offer no explanation. And—" he patted the inside of his coat. "A small flask. Brandy. Not very good brandy." "That is not what I was hoping for." "I am aware of what you were hoping for." He shrugged out of his coat. She said, "No. Granger. No, Malfoy. You are colder than I am. I am not. You are wearing a coat cut for an office. I am wearing a coat cut for a house in winter. The difference is not subtle, and I can see it from where I am standing. Take it. I will not take your coat. Then I will set it on the bench and go and stand at the far end of the room. And in a quarter of an hour, when your teeth begin, you will put it on anyway, and we will both have been made to look foolish for no reason I can presently identify. Malfoy. Granger. They looked at each other across the cellar. The oil lamp guttered. The cold pressed against the back of her neck like a hand. She had, she realized, been about to refuse him on principle. The clean, bright principle she had carried into this cellar and into this house and into every room she had ever shared with him. The principle that said, I will not be warmed by a Malfoy. I will not be sheltered by a Malfoy. I will not owe a Malfoy anything, not so much as the thread of a coat. The principle was good. The principle had kept her upright through things that would have bent other people. She had been about to refuse him, and mean it. What stopped her was the look on his face. It was not triumph. It was not even insistence. It was a kind of quiet exhaustion, the face of a man who had spent so many years not being allowed to give anyone anything useful that being refused a coat, here, now, in this particular room, was going to be one small unbearable thing on top of a great number of other small unbearable things. And he was bracing for it with the dull patience of someone who had learned to brace. One coat between two people is not warmth, she said. It is theatre. Then we will have theatre. Malfoy, share it. The word hung in the air between them. He had not meant to say it in quite that tone. She saw him register the tone a half-second after it left him, saw the small flicker at the hinge of his jaw, the quick downward glance. He had meant to propose a logistical arrangement. He had proposed something that sounded in the stone hush of the cellar like an intimacy. The bench is long enough, he said, more carefully. If we sit at the same end, the coat is large. It would cover the both of us, to the knees. It is not, I am not suggesting. I understand what you are suggesting. Good. I have not agreed. I am aware. She looked at the bench. She looked at the coat in his hands. Dark wool, good wool, a lining of some heavier stuff beneath. The sort of coat that had been made for a man to wear, walking the grounds of an estate in a snowstorm without noticing the snow. She looked at her own hands, which had gone past numb at the knuckles, and were beginning the slow pins and needles burn that preceded something worse. If I agree, she said. Yes. You will not speak. I will not speak. You will not look at me. I will not look at you. You will sit at the furthest end of the coat that the coat permits. Yes. And if I stand up, you will not stand up. I will not stand up, Granger. She crossed the cellar. She did not look at the flagstone as she passed it. She had been schooling herself for the last half hour in the exact path her feet should take, and she took it now. 2 paces along the line of the western wall, 1 pace out at the angle of the chest, and then a long, straight walk down the eastern side to the bench near the stair, where he was waiting with the coat folded once over his arm. He sat first. She had not expected him to. He sat at the far end of the bench, his back very straight, his hands folded in his lap over the coat, and he did not look up as she approached. She sat at the nearer end. There was, between them, perhaps the width of 3 of her hands. He lifted the coat with both of his own and laid it across her lap first, smoothing it once at her knee as though smoothing a napkin on a dinner table. And then he drew the other side of it across his own legs, without ever bringing his hand within 6 inches of hers. The coat was warm, not with residual body heat. He had been standing too long away from his body's own warmth for that, but with the deep, slow warmth that good wool kept in its fibres, the warmth of a house in which fires had been lit that morning in rooms she had not been permitted to see. She had not expected, quite, how much relief it would be. She closed her eyes for 1 second. Just one. She did not allow herself 2. When she opened them, he was sitting exactly as he had promised. Shoulders square, face forward, eyes fixed on the oil lamp at the top of the stair, the long, clean line of his jaw lit on one side by the yellow of the flame, and on the other by nothing. His hands were folded over his knee where the coat ended. She noticed, because she could not help noticing, that the knuckles of his right hand were faintly scraped, the skin broken in 2 places as though he had struck something recently, and the something had struck back. Malfoy, you said I was not to speak. I am speaking to you. It is different. As you like. Your hand. A pause. Yes. What did you hit? A door. Whose? Mine. She did not ask more. He did not offer more. The coat warmed slowly between them, and the lamp guttered, and neither of them looked at the other, and after a while she realized that she had begun to hear his breathing, because she had nothing else to listen to. It was even. It was slow. It was the breathing of a man holding very still on purpose, the way one held still in the presence of an animal one did not want to frighten. She did not know whether the animal was her or him. Malfoy, Granger, when you said earlier that you stood in the doorway. Yes. I do not want to talk about it now. No. I want you to know that I heard you. A silence. Then very quietly, without turning his head. Yes. That is all. Yes, Granger. She folded her hands in her own lap under the coat where he could not see them. The cold in her fingers was retreating by degrees. Her thumb had begun to feel like a thumb again. Somewhere beneath the stone, the wards made the sound that was not quite a sound, the low breath of old magic that had swallowed them and would, in its own time, decide to give them back. The lamp guttered. She did not, despite everything, move away from him on the bench. The lamp had burned lower. She did not know when it had happened. There was no window in the cellar, and her pocket watch, which had been a gift from her mother and was accurate to the second above ground, had gone strange on the stair. When she drew it out and checked it, the hands had moved, but they had moved in a way that did not quite correspond to how long she felt she had been sitting. 5 minutes. An hour. The needle swung through its little circle and declined to be more specific than that. The oil in the bracket was, however, visibly lower. That much was honest. She had shifted twice on the bench, not towards him, just shifted. The wood was hard, and her hip had started to ache, and each time she moved, she had felt him notice, not with his eyes, but with the small recalibration of his own body, the way a musician in a duet adjusted without looking when the other instrument changed key. Her left forearm had begun to itch. She ignored it. It had been itching, on and off, for 19 months, in rooms that did not deserve the memory. It itched in the ministry canteen when someone laughed too loud at the table behind her. It itched in the early morning when she was pulling on a sleeve. It did not mean anything. It was a habit her skin had learned. Tonight, it was not a habit. Tonight, the skin was answering the room. She flexed her fingers under the coat. The scar beneath the sleeve of her blouse pulled in the small specific way that scars pulled when they remembered the hand that had made them. A tightening, almost a listening, as though the letters carved into her flesh had recognized the air they had been cut in and were sitting up to attention. She drew a slow breath. "Granger, I am all right. You have gone quite white." "I have been white since I was born, Malfoy. Your observational skills require refinement." A pause. She did not look at him, but she heard, or thought she heard, the faintest hint of something that was not quite a laugh. An exhalation, rather, the breath that a laugh made before it was allowed to become one. He did not permit it to become one. It died in his throat and was replaced with the cool, measured voice of a man returning to duty. "You are holding your left arm." She had not realized. She looked down. Her right hand had, without instruction, gone under the edge of the coat and closed loosely around her own left forearm, just above the wrist, where the scar began. She had been holding it the way one held a wounded bird. She let go at once. She put the hand back on her knee. "It is nothing," she said. "Granger, it is nothing, Malfoy. You are permitted to have it be something." "I am permitted to have it be whatever I choose to have it be," she said, and the sharpness of it landed in the stone and rang there, and she heard herself, and she did not apologize. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were on the lamp. She discovered distantly that her breathing had gone shallow. He was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said, "you are." The concession undid her slightly. She had not expected it. She had expected him to press. Gently, perhaps, carefully, but to press. Instead, he had laid the point down exactly where she had placed it, and he had stepped back from it, and she was left with the strange sensation of having pushed against a door that had opened without resistance. She had stumbled a half-step forward into a room she had not meant to enter. She did not know what to do in the room. She sat very still. Under the coat, her hand had returned of its own accord to her forearm. She did not stop it this time. She pressed her palm flat against the wool of her sleeve and felt, through 2 layers of fabric, the raised ridges of letters she had long since stopped tracing in the mirror. "Malfoy." "Yes." "Have you seen it?" He did not answer. "The scar. On my arm. Have you seen it?" A pause. He did not turn his head. "Not directly," he said. "No." "But you know what is written there?" "Yes." "How?" "It was—" He stopped. He considered. He spoke with the careful slowness of a man walking across a floor he was not sure would hold him. "It was discussed. In the house. After. Not by me. I heard." "You heard?" "Yes." "Discussed." "Granger. Who discussed it?" "Does it matter?" "Yes." He was quiet again. She could feel, without looking, the particular stillness of a man choosing between 2 answers, one of which was true and the other of which was kind. "My aunt," he said at last, "and my father. Once. Over dinner. My mother left the room. I remained. You remained." "Yes." "Why?" "Because leaving would have been a statement I was not yet in a position to make, and remaining was—" He broke off. He corrected course. Because I did not leave, Granger. That is the answer. I did not leave. She closed her eyes. The cellar was very quiet. The lamp had stopped guttering and was burning evenly now, a small, steady yellow shape in the iron bracket, casting a circle of light that did not quite reach the bench. Beyond the circle, the stone held its own colder dark. She could hear the faint, steady draw of his breath beside her. She could hear the faint, answering draw of her own. "I am going to show you," she said. His head turned at last. Just enough. "Granger. Not because I owe you the sight of it, not because you are owed, because I have decided that I will not sit in this room, Malfoy, with my sleeve rolled down as though the word was something I have agreed to be ashamed of. I will not carry it like a secret in the house it was given in. I will not. Granger, you do not have to. I am not asking your permission." He shut his mouth. She drew her right hand out from under the coat. She set it to the button at her left cuff. Her fingers were steadier than she had expected them to be. She undid the button. She undid the next and the next, and she turned back the cuff of her blouse along her forearm, slowly, in the way one turned back the page of a book one had meant to read for a long time and had kept closing. The letters came into the lamplight. They were pale now, paler than she sometimes remembered them being. Time and salve had smoothed the worst of the ridges, and the skin around them had paled too, so that in certain lights, in summer, they could almost be mistaken for something else. A childhood burn, a scratched allergy. In the cellar, in the yellow oil light with the stone behind her, they were not mistakable for anything. They were exactly what they were. The word sat on her arm in its own handwriting. She did not look at him. She looked at the word. She had the vague impression at the edge of her vision that he had gone very still in the particular way a hunted thing went still. Not tensed for flight, simply arrested, as though the small muscles that made a man move had forgotten their instructions. He had not looked away. She could feel that he had not looked away. The weight of not being looked away from had a shape to it, like a hand held very close to one's skin without touching. "Look at it," she said. "I am looking. Properly. I am." Her voice, when it came, was level. She had practiced it for a long time. "The woman who did this," she said, "is dead. She was killed by a woman who loves me, in a house I love, in a war I helped to win. She cannot do it again. She cannot do it to anyone. That is a true sentence, and I say it to myself often, and it is almost always enough." A pause. "Tonight," she said, "in this room, it is not quite enough. I will not pretend that it is, but I will not hide it either. Not here, not in front of you, especially not in front of you. Granger, do not say my name like that. I do not know how else to say it. Then do not say it at all." He was silent. The silence had a texture she did not have a word for. Not the stiff silence of the early evening, not the careful silence of the bench, something newer, a silence in which something was being held in both hands and not put down. "May I," he said, "ask one thing?" "What?" "Does it hurt? Now, tonight, being in this room?" She considered lying. "Yes," she said. "Thank you." "For what?" "For telling me the truth." She turned her head then at last and looked at him. He had not, despite what she had half suspected, paled further. He had gone the opposite way. There was a faint, high colour along the line of his cheekbone, such as appeared on the faces of men who had been holding a breath for longer than was wise. His eyes were fixed on the scar, not on the letters, she realized after a moment, on the skin around them, on the place where her pulse showed faintly at the inside of her wrist, moving steadily, alive. He lifted his eyes to hers. "I am sorry," he said. "I did not ask for your apology." "I know. It does not. I know it does not." "Then why?" "Because it is true, Granger. That is the only reason. I am not offering it to be accepted. I am offering it because I have carried it for a long time, and you are the person to whom it belongs." She looked at him. She looked at him, and the word on her arm sat between them in the lamplight, and she did not cover it, and he did not look away from her face. And something in the cellar, some small invisible thing that had been pulled very tight between them since she had walked through the gate, loosened by a single notch. It did not break. It did not even slacken far. It loosened, and in the space that loosening made, she discovered that she could, just barely, draw a breath that went all the way down into her ribs. She drew it. She turned her cuff back down. She buttoned it. Her fingers, she noticed with some distant approval, did not shake at all. "Malfoy." "Yes. Do not apologize to me again tonight." "No. Once was enough." "Yes, Granger. Once was—" Her voice caught faintly on nothing. She steadied it. "Once was more than I expected. Do not do it again." "No." She put her hand back under the coat. The cellar held them, and the lamp burned, and beyond the stone the wards breathed, and on the bench between them the width of 3 hands had, without either of them moving, become the width of 2. He broke first. She had expected, if either of them was going to break, that it would be her. She had been the one with the sleeve unbuttoned, the one whose skin had been spoken of at a dinner table, the one whose blood sat in the stone 3 paces from the bench. By every reasonable measure, the right to break belonged to her. She had been carrying it, unused, for 19 months. But she was not the one who broke. She was sitting with her hands beneath the coat and her forearm buttoned and her breathing level. And it was Draco who, after a silence so long it had begun to take on the shape of a third person in the room, said her name. "Granger." "Yes." "May I tell you something?" "That depends entirely on what it is." "I know." "Tell me then." He did not speak at once. He was looking at his own hands. They had come out from under the coat at some point in the last few minutes and were resting on his knee, one laid over the other, the fingers of the upper one pressed very lightly into the knuckles of the lower. His signet ring, silver, plain, the family crest worn thin to an impression by long generations of thumbs, caught the lamplight in a small, dull gleam each time his hand moved. "That night," he said. She went still. "I am not asking you to hear it," he said. "I am telling you, I am going to say it, and if you wish to rise and walk to the far end of the cellar, I will not follow, and I will not speak it to your back, and the offer will be withdrawn and not made again. But I am going to say it. I have carried it too long in the wrong shape." She did not rise. She did not answer either. She inclined her head once, small, barely a motion, and she looked forward at the lamp, and she set her hands flat against her knees under the coat, and she said, in a voice that did not feel like her own, "Say it." He drew in a breath. It did not sound steady. He corrected it on the way out. "I was 17, he said. "That is not an excuse. I am aware that it is not an excuse. I am telling you because if I do not begin with what is true, I will not be able to say any of the rest of it correctly. I was 17, and I was frightened of my aunt, and I was frightened of my father, and I was more frightened of my father's absence than of his presence, which is a distinction I was only able to name later. When the snatchers brought you through the gate, I did not recognize you at first. When I did, he stopped. When I did, he said, I lied. I know you did. You know I lied about Potter. I also lied about you. I was asked whether it was you, and I said I could not be sure. I could be sure. I had been sure for perhaps 4 seconds by the time I said the words. I said them anyway. I did not know why at the time. I thought at the time that it was cowardice. It was not only cowardice. I did not want them to have you with a name. I wanted... He broke off, and when he spoke again, his voice had gone quieter, as though he did not trust it in its full register. I wanted you to have a chance, however small, of being someone other than the girl I had gone to school with for 6 years. I thought if you were not named, you might be let past. It was stupid. My aunt was not a woman who let things past, but I did not name you. She was looking at her hands under the coat. I know you did not name me, she said. You know. I was there, Malfoy. I heard what you said, and I heard what you did not say. I was frightened and bleeding, and I was still listening. That is what I do. A silence. Yes, he said. I should have remembered that you were still listening. Go on. When my aunt began... He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. I was standing by the door. I had been told to stand by the door. I was told without words, by my father's hand on my shoulder, which I had not felt in that way since I was a child. He put his hand on my shoulder, and he steered me to the door, and he did not take his hand off until I was standing there with my back to the hinge and my face to the room. And when he took it off, I understood I was to remain. He paused. I remained. Her throat had gone tight. I could have moved, he said. I want to be precise about this. I am not going to tell you I could not have moved. I could have. I could have drawn my wand. I could have said the word stop. I could have done a great many things that were, in the ordinary physical sense, available to me. I did not do any of them. I stood at the door and I watched, and I did not cross the threshold, and I did not speak, and when it was over, I did not. Malfoy. I did not look you in the face, even at the end, because I did not... Malfoy. He stopped. Her voice, she noticed distantly, had gone rough. She did not know when that had happened. Her hands under the coat had closed into fists so tight that her nails were pressing half-moons into the soft meat of her palms, and she was deliberately pressing them harder because the small local pain was the only thing currently keeping the rest of her organized. I do not want the details, she said. No. I was there for the details. Yes. I want to know one thing. Ask. Why are you telling me this? He was silent. You said you have carried it in the wrong shape. What shape is the right one? He did not look at her. He looked at the lamp. The small, steady yellow of the flame reflected in his eye as a single bright point, like a star seen through cold glass. I do not know, he said. That is the honest answer. I do not know what the right shape of it is. I only know that the shape it has had, the shape of a thing I have kept away from you, out of a kind of mercy I had no right to offer, has been convenient for me. It has been convenient because as long as I did not speak of it, I did not have to sit with your face while it was spoken of. I did not have to see what it did to you. I could continue to believe that my silence was a courtesy to you, when in fact it was a courtesy to me. I am tired, Granger. I am tired of arranging my guilt for my own comfort. I would rather, at this point, arrange it for yours, even if that means... He did not finish. Even if that means what? She said. Even if that means you ask me to leave the bench. She looked at him. He was still looking at the lamp. His hands on his knee had not moved. His jaw was set in a line that she recognized after a moment as the line he had held through the whole of the Wisingamot testimony, the line he had held through the worst of the cross-examination, the line that meant I am not going to show you what this is costing me, because showing you would be asking you for something, and I am not entitled to ask. She understood with a small dropping clarity that he meant it. He had said what he had said, and he had said it, knowing that the end of it might be her rising from the bench and going to stand at the foot of the stair and not speaking to him again until the wards opened the door. He had said it anyway. He had decided that his comfort was no longer a sufficient reason for her to remain inside a lie about him. She sat with this knowledge for a long moment. She thought of several things she could say. She thought of, I forgive you, which she did not, and would not say as a kindness, because a kindness in that shape would be a lie, and he had just handed her, at cost, a piece of truth. She would not answer truth with its cheaper counterfeit. She thought of, I do not forgive you, which was accurate but not complete, and which would, spoken now, do more damage than it clarified. She thought of silence, and rejected it, because silence was what had stood at the door of this room in April of 1998, and she was done with what silence had done. Malfoy, she said, yes, I am not going to forgive you tonight. No, I may not forgive you at all. I do not know. I am not making a decision about that in this cellar, in this light, at this hour. That decision is mine, and I will make it in my own time, in a room of my own choosing, and not under any pressure you apply by having spoken, and not under any pressure I apply to myself by having heard. I understand. But, she paused. She steadied her voice. She had not planned the but, and she was not certain yet what followed it. She allowed the word to sit in the air until the shape of what came next clarified. But I am not going to ask you to leave the bench. He turned his head. He did it slowly, as though he had not quite trusted the sentence on its first pass and wanted the second hearing to be unmistakable. His eyes in the lamplight had gone a colour she did not have a word for. Not grey now, not pewter, something warmer at the edges, as though the iron in him had been held close enough to a flame for long enough that the flame had begun at last to show. Granger, do not make me repeat it. No, do not thank me for it either. No, it is not. It is not absolution, Malfoy. It is not even a kindness. It is a decision I'm making about the bench. Do you understand? Yes. Say it. It is a decision you are making about the bench. Good. She turned her face forward again. She drew a breath that was not quite steady, and she did not apologize for its not being steady. Her hands under the coat unclosed, slowly, from the fists they had made. The half-moons in her palms stung faintly as the blood returned to them. Beside her, very quietly, she heard him exhale. One long, careful breath, The breath of a man who had been holding more than he had realized he was holding, and who now, permitted to set it down, was discovering that his arms ached from the weight. Neither of them moved. The lamp burned. The cold pressed on the stone. The cellar held them, and the flagstone held its colour, and the wards in their own language breathed beneath the floor. The width of 2 hands on the bench between them remained 2 hands. It did not widen. The lamp, in the end, was what gave. It had been guttering at longer intervals for some time. She had been counting them, because counting small regular things was what her mind did when it refused to do the larger irregular things. And the intervals had been getting shorter, and then at some point past what she believed was midnight, the small, steady yellow shape in the iron bracket thinned to a blue thread, held for perhaps 4 seconds, and went out. The cellar did not go entirely dark. She had expected it to. She had braced for it, in the small way one braced for a wave that had been visibly approaching for a quarter of an hour. What she found instead, when her eyes had adjusted, was that the room was lit by a second, dimmer source she had not noticed before. A faint, greenish phosphorescence coming from somewhere at the back of the cellar, perhaps from the silver-chased cabinet itself, perhaps from the wards that had sealed them in, perhaps from some older thing in the stones that had been waiting all evening for the lamp to have the courtesy to die so that it could be seen. The light was not friendly. It cast her hands when she looked at them in the colour of river water held against a window in winter. She could still see him. That was the salient fact. She could still see him, and he could still see her. And the visibility between them was now the visibility of 2 people standing in a fog at dusk, enough to read a posture, not quite enough to read an expression. "Granger." "Yes." "Are you all right?" "I am colder." "Yes." "Are you?" "Yes." A pause. "The lamp will not relight," he said. "I have tried. The wards will not permit an open flame while they are working. Lumos will function, but it will drain my wand, and if something else requires me to cast, later, do not cast." "No." The cold had changed character. While the lamp had burned, there had been a small circle of implied warmth around it. Implied, imaginary, not warmth in any measurable sense, only the mind's habitual response to the sight of a flame. And the loss of that circle had been, in some ways, the loss of more than the light. The air had a new edge now. It went into her lungs and sat there. She was shivering. She had been shivering for some minutes without noticing. When she did notice it, she went still on purpose, because to shiver visibly in front of Draco Malfoy was one of the small dignities she had told herself at the beginning of the evening she would preserve. She set her jaw. The shivering continued. Jaws did not, it turned out, have anything to do with it. "Granger." "I am fine." "You are not." "I am fine, Malfoy. Your teeth are chattering." "My teeth are doing what they like. I am not responsible for my teeth." He exhaled. It sounded almost like a laugh. He did not quite permit it to be one. "Come closer," he said. The words dropped into the green half-light and sat there. She did not answer at once. He did not take them back. He did not qualify them, which was what she had half expected him to do. Some cool clinical footnote about shared body heat and the well-documented effects of proximity on thermal regulation. Some retreat into the dry register that would have allowed them both to pretend the sentence had been a procedural instruction. He did not retreat. He let the words stand. She looked at him. In the dim green, he was barely a man. He was an arrangement of lines. The straight line of his back, the clean line of his jaw, the curved line of his hand, where it rested on the coat at his knee, palm down, fingers slightly spread, as though he had placed it there some time ago and had not, since, permitted himself to move it. Malfoy, I am not asking you anything you do not want to be asked. If the answer is no, the answer is no. I will sit where I am, and you will sit where you are, and neither of us will speak of it again. I am saying that you are cold, and that I am cold, and that the coat is a coat, not a blanket, and that it does not do what it is meant to do with the width of 2 hands between us. That is all I am saying. That is not all you are saying. No? Say the rest of it. He was quiet. I would like you to come closer, he said. Because I would like you to come closer. I am aware that this is not a sufficient reason. I am offering it because you asked me to, and because I have decided this evening that I will not refuse you an honest answer when you ask me for one. I am not asking you to honor the reason. I am only asking you not to disbelieve me when I give it. She drew a breath. It was not a steady one. She set her hands flat on her knees under the coat. She did not look at him. She looked at the greenish outline of the lamp that was not burning, at the darker shape of the stair beyond it, at the small, indistinct geometry of the cabinet doors against the far wall. She was aware, with a sharpness that had nothing to do with the cold, of the exact distance of her right hip from his left, of the exact angle of the bench, of the exact warmth that had built up in the coat between them, and was now, slowly, being pulled out of it by the failing temperature of the room. She moved. She did not cross the whole distance. She crossed half of it, perhaps the width of one hand, and she did it slowly, the way one did something one was not sure one had permission to do. And she did it without looking at him, and when she had done it, she set her hands back on her knees exactly where they had been before, and she looked forward at the unlit lamp as though nothing had happened. She felt him go still. For perhaps 3 seconds, she thought she had made a mistake, that she had moved too far, or not far enough, or at the wrong moment, or with the wrong intention, and that he was about to say something dry and correct and devastating that would return them both to the opposite ends of the bench and leave them there until dawn. He did not. Instead, with the same careful slowness, he moved as well. Not half the remaining distance. Something less than that. A small, considered fraction of it, the exact fraction that left between them a gap which could not honestly be called distance any longer, but which also could not be called touching. A gap with a specific purpose. A gap that said, I have heard you, and I am meeting you, and I am not closing the last of it without your word. Her shoulder, she discovered, was roughly an inch from his shoulder. The warmth reached her first through the coat. Not dramatically. Not the sudden hot flare of contact. They were not in contact. But the quieter thing, the way a hand held near a fire felt the fire before the fire touched it. Her left side, which had been colder than her right for an hour, began, slowly, to remember what the word warm had meant. She closed her eyes for 1 second. She opened them. Malfoy. Yes. Your hand. What of it? It is still on your knee. Yes. You have not moved it? No. Why? A pause. Because I said I would not look at you, and I have not looked at you. And I said I would not speak unless you spoke, and I have not spoken unless you spoke. And I have decided, Granger, that I am not going to stop obeying the terms you set at the beginning of the evening, simply because the evening has become what it has become. If my hand is to move, it is not going to be my hand that decides. She looked down at his hand. It was, in the green light, a pale shape against the darker wool of the coat. The fingers were slightly spread, as they had been for some time. The signet ring caught no light. There was no light to catch. His knuckles, where he had struck the door, were not visible in this dimness, only the general shape of the hand, long-fingered, loose, waiting. She looked at her own hand. It was in her lap, under the coat, curled against her thigh. She did not plan what she did next. If she had planned it, she would not have done it, because she had spent the entirety of her adult life planning gestures towards people she cared about, and the planning had always, without exception, taken the life out of the gesture before it arrived. She moved her hand out of her lap. She moved it slowly. She laid the backs of her fingers lightly against the back of his. It was not a holding. It was the placement of one set of knuckles against another set of knuckles, the way one might set a coin down on a table to mark a place in a conversation. Her skin was cold. His was colder. The contact was so small that she could feel the individual ridges of his tendons through the thin fabric of her glove. She had not, she realized, taken her glove off. And then she understood, with a small private mortification, that she had just done a very brave thing with a layer of wool between them, and that the bravery had been undercut by its own armor. She began to withdraw her hand. His turned over. He did it without looking. He did it with the slow inevitability of a thing that had been waiting some minutes for permission and had been given it. His palm came up under her fingers, and he did not close his hand around hers. He did not grip, he did not clutch, he did not take. He only let his palm rest beneath her knuckles, open, so that if she wished to withdraw her hand, she could, and if she did not wish to withdraw her hand, she did not have to. She did not withdraw her hand. She pulled the glove off. She did it with her other hand, slowly, finger by finger, and she did it without breaking the contact at her knuckles. And when the glove was off, she lowered her bare palm onto his, and for the first time that evening, for the first time she realized in the whole history of her knowing him, their skin was against each other's skin, without a courtroom or a classroom or a war between them. His hand was cold. It was the cold of a man who had been sitting very still for a long time in a stone room, and who had been refusing, out of some private discipline, to rub his hands together to warm them. She felt it begin to warm under hers. Neither of them moved beyond that. Neither of them spoke. The green light held the cellar, and the wards, beneath the floor, went on with their slow, indifferent breathing, and on the bench, their two hands, one turned up and one laid down, stayed precisely where they were. Her shivering had stopped. She did not know when. They sat like that for a long time. She did not measure it. Her pocket watch had given up some hours ago. She had checked it once, without lifting her hand from his, and the hands had been pointing to a time that could not have been correct, and she had closed the case and let it lie. Time in the cellar had stopped behaving like time. It had become a property of the light, and the light was green. And green, it turned out, moved more slowly than yellow. Her palm had warmed his had warmed hers back. Somewhere in the middle of that exchange, the distinction between which hand was warming, which had quietly stopped mattering, and what was left was simply the fact of them. Two hands that had chosen each other, lightly, and had not, in any of the minutes since, chosen otherwise. Her head had, at some point, come to rest against the stone behind her, not his shoulder. She had not gone that far. She had tilted her head back against the wall, and the wall was colder than it should have been, and the cold of it kept her faintly awake in a way that was almost kind. A small, reliable edge she could lean into when the rest of her wanted to sleep. He had not moved. That was what she noticed in the long green hush, how entirely he had not moved. His back was straight. His face was turned towards the stair, not towards her. His free hand, the one not beneath hers, lay on his own knee in the same spread, loose, waiting posture it had held for an hour. He was sitting, she understood slowly, with the discipline of a man who had been given a thing he had not expected to receive, and who was not going to jeopardize it by shifting his weight. Malfoy, yes, you may move. I am comfortable. You are not. I am more comfortable than I have been in a great while, Granger, which is perhaps not the same as comfortable in the general sense, but it is the sense I am concerned with. Your shoulder will ache in the morning. Then it will ache. She did not argue further. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, the green light had, impossibly, dimmed. It had gone from the green of river water to the green of deep moss, and she understood, with a small interior sharpening that was not quite alarm, that the wards were beginning to thin. She had noticed other signs. The stone beneath her feet had, in the last quarter of an hour, ceased to draw the warmth out of her boots with the same greed. The pressure she had felt against her ears, the charged hush of old magic holding a space closed, had eased to the point where she had to concentrate to feel it at all. Somewhere very distantly, she thought she had heard, perhaps once, perhaps not, the small wooden creak of the door at the top of the stair shifting in its frame. Dawn was coming. She did not know what time dawn was in Wiltshire in January in this year. She had not been on a January dawn for some time. But it was coming, and the room knew it, and soon the door would know it, and soon the door would open, and soon they would walk up the stair and out into a corridor and into a house that was full of portraits and elves and the small, bright, officious light of a ministry morning, and the thing that had happened on the bench would have to decide what it was going to be in daylight. She turned her face towards him. He had turned his towards her at the same moment, as though the same thought had reached him on the same breath, and for one absurd second they nearly struck foreheads in the dim, and both of them went still, and neither of them drew back, and they were left with their faces perhaps 6 inches apart in the green half-dark. His breath was warm against her mouth. She had not expected it to be. She had expected. She had not known what she had expected. That they would speak, perhaps, and that one of them would say something sensible, and that the sensible thing would rearrange them by small degrees back to the configuration in which they could safely leave the cellar. Instead, there was his breath against her mouth, and the faint scent of brandy beneath it that she had not seen him drink and did not quite understand, and the faint, clean scent of something else, perhaps only soap, perhaps only the particular dry smell of a starched collar that had been worn too long into a cold night. Neither of them closed the 6 inches. Neither of them widened them either. Granger. Yes. The wards are thinning. I know. The door will open within the hour, I think. I cannot be certain. I know. If I... Malfoy. If I do not say this now, I will not say it. I will walk you up the stair, and I will stand in the entrance hall, and I will watch you fasten your coat, and I will bow when you leave, because that is what I know how to do. And then I will go back upstairs to a room in this house, and I will sit in a chair, and I will... He stopped. He swallowed. I will sit in a chair, Granger, and I will think about this bench, and I will not know whether I was permitted to want what I wanted on it, and I will not know whether you want me to write to you or not to write to you, and I would rather be refused now than be uncertain for the rest of my life. Her mouth, she realized, had gone dry. What are you asking? She said. I am not asking anything. You are. I am. He closed his eyes for 1 second. He opened them. I am asking whether, when the door opens, I will be permitted to write to you. That is all I am asking. I am not asking for more than that. I am not asking for what you would not give, and I am not asking for what I would not deserve. And I am asking only for a piece of paper, Granger, a piece of paper between us, once, so that I know this evening did not, so that I know it did not end at the top of that stair. She looked at him. He was very close. The green light made the grey of his eyes into something softer, something almost the colour of the sea before a storm. And the line of his jaw that she had watched hold through every hour of the evening was, now, at last, beginning to fail. A small muscle was moving at the corner of it. His free hand on his own knee had closed. She understood, with a small dropping clarity, that she had never in her life been looked at this way. Not across a Gryffindor table at breakfast, not across a ballroom, not across a courtroom, not across a pillow. She had been looked at, she had been cherished, she had been regarded with great tenderness by great people, and none of them had ever looked at her the way this narrow, pale man was looking at her now, which was the way a person looked at a thing he had stopped hoping for long enough ago that he had forgotten the name of the hope, and who now, confronted with it, did not know whether he was meant to reach for it or kneel. Malfoy. Yes. Do not ask my permission. Do not ask it, and do not wait for it. Not for this. His breath caught. She did not plan it. She had planned nothing all evening. Her planning had been unmade, piece by piece, from the moment the door had sealed. She lifted her free hand, the one not beneath his, and she set the tips of her fingers very lightly against the line of his jaw, at the place where the small muscle had been moving, and she felt the movement stop beneath her fingers as though her touch had translated it into stillness. She closed the 6 inches. It was not, at first, a kiss in any definite sense. It was the placement of her mouth against his mouth, the way she had placed her knuckles against his knuckles, a thing tentative and exact, a question phrased in skin. His lips were cool. They did not move. For one suspended breath, she thought that she had misread him entirely, that the piece of paper had been the whole of what he was asking, and she had offered him a thing he had not known how to want, and she was a quarter of an inch away from drawing back when she felt him exhale, once, shakily, into the space between them, and his mouth, at last, answered hers. It was a slow answer. It was the answer of a man who had spent a long time deciding he would not be permitted anything, and who was, on being permitted this, taking the permission seriously, honouring it with the whole small attention of his mouth. He did not grasp her. His hand beneath hers did not close. His free hand on his knee did not rise. He kissed her with his lips only, slowly, once, and then once again, and then a third time in which something in him, some final careful restraint that he had been holding since the courtroom, gave way, and his free hand came up at last and settled with absurd gentleness against the side of her neck, beneath her jaw, just below her ear, where the pulse was. He held it there. He did not move the hand. He did not draw her closer. He only kept his palm against her pulse, as though he had been waiting for a long time to know, precisely, that her heart was beating and needed, now, to feel it do so under his hand. Her pulse, obligingly, gave him the information he was asking for. She drew back a fraction, not from him, only far enough to see him. And she did not take her hand from his jaw, and she did not take her other hand from beneath his, and she said very quietly, "Write to me." "Yes." "Write to me tomorrow." "Yes, Granger." "Hermione." He closed his eyes. "Hermione," he said. His voice broke very slightly on the middle of it. He did not try to hide that it had. "Yes, tomorrow." She rested her forehead against his. They sat like that, foreheads touching, her hand at his jaw and his hand at her throat, and their other hands still interleaved on the coat between them, while the green light thinned from moss to river to the palest possible trace of jade, and somewhere above the cellar, in a corridor she could not see, a clock she had never heard struck the hour, and at the top of the stair, with a small, clean wooden sigh, the door released. Neither of them moved yet. Neither of them moved. She heard the door give. It was not a dramatic sound. She had expected, perhaps, some final flourish from the wards, a last burst of green along the stones, a low groan from the hinges, the theatrical gesture of a house admitting that it had been for a night overruled. There was none of that. There was only the small wooden sigh she had already heard, the quiet shift of a latch settling back into the shape it was meant to hold, and, after it, an almost imperceptible change in the pressure of the air, as though a window she had not known was closed had, somewhere, been set ajar. She did not lift her forehead from his. Neither did he. For perhaps a count of 10 they remained as they were, 2 foreheads touching, her palm against his jaw, his palm against her throat, their joined hands warm now on the coat between them. And in that count she understood, with a small private clarity, that the opening of the door had changed nothing about this particular minute. The door had opened. It could wait. It had waited for them long enough. It could wait a little further. When he finally drew back, he did it by fractions. His hand did not leave her throat at once. It lingered, and then his thumb moved. One single small movement, a stroke along the line of her jaw, so light that if she had not been holding perfectly still, she might have missed it. And then his hand came away, slowly, and he folded it, careful and empty, back against his knee. Her hand at his jaw was slower to withdraw. She let it fall at last, because the logic of the room had changed, and a hand held against a man's face in a cellar at dawn was a different sentence, grammatically, from the same hand held against the same face in a cellar during the night. She understood the change in tense. She permitted her hand to acknowledge it, but she did not, she noticed, let go of his other hand, and he did not, she noticed, withdraw it from hers. "The door," she said. "Yes." "We should—" "Yes." Neither of them stood. He did, after another moment, look at the stair. She watched him do it. She watched the practical assessment come back into his face. The Malfoy face, the one he wore in corridors and at gates, the careful, composed public thing. And she watched, too, the small difference in it that had not been there yesterday, and would not, she thought, leave it today. Something in the set of his mouth had loosened. Something at the corners of his eyes had admitted fatigue. He looked, for the first time since she had known him, like a man who had slept on a question for a long time and had woken at last with an answer. "I will walk you up," he said. "Yes. I will not touch you in the corridor, for your sake, until, Malfoy, until we have decided what we are, in daylight. That is sensible. Yes. I do not want sensible." He turned to look at her. "I did not say I wanted sensible," she said. "I said it was sensible. Those are not the same sentence. I am acknowledging that it is sensible. I am informing you separately that I would prefer you to walk me up the stair with your hand in mine and let the portraits make of it what they like." He did not answer at once. Then, very quietly, with the faintest dry edge she had ever heard in his voice, and a quantity of feeling beneath it that she did not pretend to measure. "Granger. Hermione. Hermione. If we walk up the stair with our hands joined, 3 portraits will have written to my mother before we reach the entrance hall. I am aware. My mother will write to the prophet before noon. I am aware. You are certain. I am certain that I did not spend 19 months refusing to be ashamed of a scar on my arm in order to be ashamed this morning of a hand in mine. I am certain of that, at least. The rest I will be certain of later. For now, the scar and the hand are a matching set, and they will be walked up the stair together." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, in the green light that was no longer green, but only a very pale, thinning dimness that would, very shortly, be something a person could call daylight, he smiled. It was not a smile she had seen before. She had seen his sneers, his polite small courtroom curve, his vanished schoolboy smirk. She had not seen this. This was a tired, private shape at the corner of his mouth, a thing that had not been practiced, that had surprised him on its way out. It lasted perhaps 2 seconds. It left behind a softness about the eye that did not go away when the mouth had stopped. "As you wish," he said. They stood. Their knees complained in unison, which struck her absurdly as funny. She did not quite laugh. She exhaled through her nose in a way that suggested a laugh had been in the vicinity and had elected, out of respect for the hour, not to trouble it. He did the same. Their hands, when they rose, did not separate. He offered her his coat and she took it, and she draped it over her own arm because she had determined that she would walk up out of the cellar wearing her own coat, the ministry one, the armour she had brought with her. His coat she would carry. She did not look at the flagstone as she passed it. That was not because she could not. She could now. She had discovered somewhere in the small hours that the flagstone had returned to being stone. It had been, for 19 months, the whole of a memory, a single dark door she could not go near without the door opening. Tonight the door had opened by itself, and she had walked through it, and she had found on the other side a room she had thought to be locked that turned out, instead, to be a room. She did not look at the flagstone because she did not need to. Looking would have been a small ceremony, and she had, she thought, performed enough small ceremonies for one night. He led her up the stair. At the top, the door stood open. Beyond it, the long stone corridor of the western wing stretched away in a grey, which, she understood as she stepped through, was no longer the grey of oil light, but the grey of the first true hour of a winter morning. The tall, narrow windows at the far end held a paleness that could not yet be called sunrise, but that was no longer night. She had forgotten in the cellar what that colour was called. She remembered now. He did not let go of her hand. They walked the corridor together. The portraits were, as he had predicted, immediately awake. She heard the first rustle at the third alcove. An elderly Malfoy in a ruff, who sat forward in his frame with the slow, offended interest of a man who had not been presented with anything this objectionable in 200 years. She heard the second at the sixth alcove. Two ladies in riding habit who did not speak, but who very pointedly did not stop looking. By the time they reached the long gallery, she had registered perhaps a dozen small attentions, and Draco had registered them with her, and his hand in hers had not tightened and had not loosened, and had not once suggested that he would prefer on reflection a different arrangement. At the end of the gallery his mother was waiting. Narcissa Malfoy stood in a pale grey morning gown at the head of the stair that led down to the entrance hall, her hands folded in front of her, her face composed in the particular way that the faces of Malfoy women composed themselves when they were deciding what a situation would be required to mean. She had, Hermione understood at once, been told. Some portrait in some earlier corridor had reached her already. She had come to the head of the stair because she had elected to meet the situation on her own terms, rather than encounter it in a doorway. Her eyes went first to Draco. They went, second, to the joined hands. They went, third, to Hermione's face. She did not speak for a long moment. Then, with an inclination of her head so small it could almost have been declined, she said, "Miss Granger, you will take tea before you leave." It was not a question. "Thank you," Hermione said. "I will. In the morning room." "In the morning room. Draco will show you." "I know the way, Mother," Draco said quietly. "I am aware that you know the way." Narcissa's eyes moved briefly to her son's. Something passed between them that Hermione did not have the history to read, but that was not, she thought, unkind. "I was establishing the destination for Miss Granger, not the route for you." She turned. She went down the stair. She did not look back. Draco exhaled, very quietly, almost a laugh, almost not. He looked down at Hermione, and the tired private shape was at the corner of his mouth again. "She will write to the Prophet," he said. "Let her. You are certain?" "I am certain." They went down the stair together. In the morning room, a fire had already been lit, and on a low table a silver service had been set with a fresh pot and 2 cups, and a small plate of something she did not, in that moment, have the composure to identify. The light through the tall east windows had begun at last to be honestly called light. It fell in long pale bars across the carpet, and across her boots, and across the hem of his coat where it lay folded over her arm. He let go of her hand, finally to pour. She watched him do it. She watched the steadiness return to his hands as they performed a small familiar ritual they had performed 1,000 times, the ordinary domestic precision of a man who had been taught young to pour tea correctly, and who was grateful this morning for something his body remembered how to do without him. He poured hers first. He added no milk because he did not know how she took it. He set the cup in front of her, and he looked up at her with the particular grave attention of a man awaiting instruction in a matter that mattered. "A little milk," she said. "No sugar." "Thank you." He added the milk. He handed her the cup. Their fingers brushed and did not retreat. She drank. The tea was hot and ordinary and perfect. She closed her eyes for the second sip and opened them for the third, and across the low table, Draco Malfoy was watching her drink tea with the expression of a man who had not known, before this morning, that it was possible to be given such a thing. "Tomorrow," she said. "Yes. You will write. I will write. I will answer." "Hermione," "I will answer, Malfoy. I am not promising what the answer will say. I am promising that there will be one. You will not sit in a chair in this house wondering whether there will be one. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Good." She set her cup down. She reached across the low table and she took his hand again. Not because she needed to, because she had decided that the morning too would have in it the hand, and that the hand would not belong only to the cellar. His fingers closed around hers. The signet ring pressed, small and cool, against her knuckle. Outside the tall east windows, over the long snow-pale grounds of Malfoy Manor, the sun at last came up. It was not an ending. It was not, she understood, even quite a beginning. Beginnings were quieter things than people gave them credit for, and this one had begun hours ago, on a stone bench, in a room that had once been the whole of a wound, and was now, she thought, only a room. It was, however, the morning. She held his hand across the table, and he held hers back, and the tea went on being hot between them, and the light went on climbing the carpet, and somewhere above them, in a corridor full of indignant portraits, a woman in a pale grey gown began, with the small exact efficiency of a Malfoy at a writing desk, to compose a letter to the editor of the Daily Prophet. Hermione Granger, for the first time in 19 months, smiled into her cup.
8 hours in a cold room, 1 coat, 1 candle, and so many things they never said before. I wanted to write a story where nothing big happens on the outside. No spells, no fight, no running. Just 2 people, 1 bench, and a door that will not open until morning. Because I think we all have a room like that. A place we do not want to go back to. A person we do not want to see. A truth we have been carrying for a long, long time. And sometimes life locks the door behind us, and we have to sit, and we have to look, and we have to speak. Hermione did not forgive him tonight. I want you to notice that. She did not say it is okay, because it was not okay. It will not be okay for a long time. But she took his hand anyway, and he held it, and that is something else. That is not forgiveness, that is the beginning of being seen. I think love, real love, starts there, not with big words, not with promises, just with one person saying, I will sit here with you in this cold room until the sun comes up. Thank you for sitting here with me. If this story touched you even a little, please leave a comment. Tell me one word, just one, and I will read them all. And I will see you in the next story soon. Take care of your heart.